There's something Scorpio carries within them that even they can't quite explain. It's not exactly fear. It's not exactly intuition in the way people romanticize it. It's more like a weight that appears suddenly, without warning, when someone around them starts acting slightly differently than usual. A pause before replying that didn't exist before. A glance that drifted away too quickly. A kindness that came without apparent reason. Other people ignore this. Scorpio can't. And the strangest thing isn't that he realizes it. It's that he's almost always right. There is indeed something happening. There is indeed a movement behind the scenes. And he sensed it before he had any proof. Everyone around him says it's paranoia, that he overthinks things, that he makes up stories in his head. But Scorpio knows, and you watching this know, that it's not making things up. It's reading. It's the ability to pick up on frequencies that most people don't even know exist. The problem isn't the radar. The problem is what Scorpion does with what the radar picks up, because there's a huge difference, and it's a costly difference, between detecting that something is being set in motion and understanding what's actually being planned. And Scorpio, with all its intelligence, with all its razor-sharp perception, sometimes confuses the two in a way that changes the course of its story. When you feel that inexplicable tension, that feeling that something is happening outside your field of vision, what do? You hold it in, you observe, you process it silently, you build a mental map of intentions, of movements, of possible motives, and while you do this, a part of you has already begun to prepare for an impact that hasn't even arrived yet. This is not weakness, it's Scorpio's way of operating. But this silent preparation comes at a cost. Because while you're setting up the mental chessboard, while you're calculating the possibilities, there's a question Scorpio rarely asks. What if the plan doesn't go as I imagined? Because someone is planning something serious involving you. This is real. The signal you picked up isn't noise. But what this person is planning, and who this person really is, will surprise you in a way you're not prepared to receive. I'm not talking about a comfortable revelation. I'm talking about something that will force Scorpio to confront a layer they rarely let surface. A truth about what happens in the inner shadows, not just the outer ones. This video will take you there layer by layer. But before you get to the bottom, and you will get to the bottom, you need to understand where this Scorpio radar really came from. Because the origin changes everything. It changes how you interpret the signal. It changes what you do with it. Everyone knows that Scorpios are intense, that they feel too much, that they process deeply, that they forget nothing. But almost no one asks, when did they learn to be like this? It wasn't a choice. It was an adaptation. At some point in his history, perhaps in a childhood where the rules changed according to the mood of whoever was in control, perhaps in a relationship where loyalty was tested and didn't survive, perhaps in a situation where he realized that what he saw on the surface had a completely different face underneath. Scorpio learned that the world hides more than it shows. And then he started looking underneath everything. Not as a habit, as an instinct, as the only way that made sense. What people call distrust in Scorpio is, in fact, a reality reading system that was built under real pressure. Each betrayal calibrated the radar. Each silence that hid something sharpened the detector. Scorpio doesn't distrust out of emotional addiction. It distrusts because it has learned that there are frequencies that most people don't hear. And now that radar is activated, now he's picking up on something. And here's what few can accept. The signal can be completely accurate and at the same time completely misinterpreted, because there's a blind spot in Scorpio that no intensity, no intelligence, no depth can eliminate alone. And it's precisely in this blind spot that the most important plan involving you is being hatched, not by the enemy you were watching, but by a direction you rarely consider with that same care. It was while searching for answers to this that I found this digital book. The divine path that guides your zodiac sign to a life of purpose came to me at a time when I realized something was moving around me, but I couldn't distinguish what was real perception from what was internal construction. What this book did wasn't give me ready-made answers. It did something more difficult and much more valuable. It taught me to go deeper without getting lost in the process. For Scorpio, going deep isn't instruction, it's nature. But learning to consciously direct that depth without letting the filter of old wounds distort what is being captured changes the quality of everything you find when you dive in. You are currently in a very specific moment, still processing, with that active feeling that something is moving, with that vivid discomfort that Scorpio knows so well, the certainty that there is a layer that has not yet been turned. This state is the time to act, not when things are calmer. Now, while your perception is open, the link is in the first pinned comment. But be aware, this content may be taken down. Click now and download your copy. Tell me in the comments, have you ever felt that something serious was being planned involving you, but upon investigating, you discovered that the origin was completely different from what you imagined? What did that moment reveal about you? Scorpio's blind spot has a name. It's not paranoia, that word is too simplistic. It's projection in the most precise technical sense. Scorpio is so trained to sense intentions that when the threat doesn't have a clear face, the mind begins to construct one. And the face it constructs is always the one that makes the most sense within the story Scorpio already carries. Imagine a security camera in a dark environment. It captures movement, but if the image is grainy, the brain will fill in the details with what it already knows. That's not a lie. It's the brain doing its job. However, the result is an image that captures real movement, but attributes that movement to the wrong shadow. This happens to Scorpio more often than they'd like to admit. Someone distances themselves slightly, and Scorpio senses planned distancing. Someone changes the subject, and Scorpio detects intentional diversion. Someone acts with unusual kindness, and Scorpio reads manipulation underneath. The radar picks up the signal, but the interpretation is filtered through older stories, wounds that haven't truly healed yet. And here's what's disturbingly beautiful about it. Scorpio isn't wrong to sense that something is being planned. The movement exists, the sign is real. It's just that the face of this movement is hidden in a place that Scorpio rarely investigates with the same intensity that it directs at others. It is hidden within oneself. The person who is planning something serious involving you, the main one, is you. It's the part of Scorpio that already knows a transformation is coming and is moving pieces to make it happen. Pieces that the conscious mind hasn't yet accepted, is still trying to interpret as an external threat. And this type of plan, when it is revealed, cannot be neutralized with strategy. The only way to circumvent it is to get past it. If that layer of Scorpio resonates with you, that ability to sense what's moving before you see it, the divine path that guides your zodiac sign to a life of purpose, will give you concrete tools to distinguish what you're genuinely picking up from what you're building from old stories. For Scorpio, this distinction isn't just useful, it's the difference between using your greatest gift as a weapon or as a compass. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey toward the clarity and genius you deserve. When Scorpio is confronted with the possibility that the source of what they are perceiving is internal, there are two possible reactions. The first is resistance. The second is rarer and far more powerful, genuine inward-focused investigation with the same relentlessness they apply when investigating anything else. Because Scorpio knows how to investigate. The question is whether you're willing to turn that gaze upon yourself without blinking. To do that, he needs to understand what happens to brands. Every profound experience leaves a mark, not as a visible scar, as a frequency, as a pattern that vibrates at a particular moment, and that, when the environment resonates at that frequency, Scorpio responds. Not because you choose to, because you are calibrated for it in a way that goes beyond conscious decision. Imagine a musical instrument tuned under intense pressure. Even years later, even in a different environment, when a similar note echoes around, the instrument vibrates. It is not being manipulated. It is responding to the physics of sound with the precision for which it was built. Scorpio works this way with emotions. A present situation that resonates with an old pain doesn't need to be identical to trigger the alert system. It only needs to have a similar frequency. And Scorpio's system is so sensitive, calibrated through such intense experiences, that sometimes the response appears before there's sufficient stimulus to justify it. That's why Scorpio often anticipates the worst without clear evidence. That's why you start preparing for battles that sometimes never come. And that's why the emotional cost of living with that level of anticipation is much higher than those around you realize, or than Scorpio themselves admits. Recognizing that this response comes from old signals doesn't invalidate the radar. It clarifies the signal. It separates what is a real frequency of the present from what is an echo of a past that hasn't yet been fully processed. And when the signal is clear, the plan involving you begins to take on a completely different form. We've reached a point that most content about Scorpio never gets to. Not because it's impossible, because it's too uncomfortable. Scorpio has a very specific relationship with power. Not raw, performative power, the kind that needs an audience. Silent power, the power of knowledge, of having information that others don't have, of understanding the game before any other player around the table realizes there is a game. This power is real. It's not an illusion. It's a genuine ability developed through much observation, much silence, and much internal processing. But there's a side to this power that Scorpio rarely admits to himself, how much he uses it to keep people at a safe distance. Think about it. If you know, or believe you know, what people are capable of, what they hide beneath their presentable discourse, what motivates them beneath the reasons they state, why would you open up completely? Your own emotional intelligence becomes, at times, the most sophisticated justification for the most solitary isolation. And this isolation doesn't seem like isolation to Scorpio. It seems like wisdom. It seems like the only rational stance in the face of a world that he knows hides more than it shows. But here's the mirror that nobody wanted to hold up in front of Scorpio. The most serious plan involving you right now is your own internal architecture, which is trying to force you out of this position of permanent observer, of someone who sees everything but exposes themselves to nothing, of someone who feels everything but reveals little, because Scorpio was made to transform, not just to perceive the transformations happening around them. And while remaining within the protected observer's perspective, the transformation is never truly completed. That's disturbing to hear, I know, but it is precisely this kind of truth that the divine path that guides your zodiac sign to a life of purpose explores with rare depth. Not as a list of generic recommendations, but as a mirror that accurately reflects the nature of Scorpio, with genuine respect for the complexity you carry. Understanding your purpose is not about simplifying who you are. It's about giving direction to all that depth. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. There is a very specific moment in a Scorpio's life that changes everything. It's not a dramatic event visible from the outside. It's silent, almost imperceptible to any external witness. This is the moment when Scorpio stops using their perception to protect themselves and begins to use it to build themselves up. It sounds simple when described like that. It isn't, because these two things, protecting and building, use the same fuel, the same intensity. The difference isn't in the intensity, it's in the direction. When the radar points outward, detecting threats, anticipating movements, all of Scorpio's energy goes into defense to avoid being caught off guard again. This proved valuable. It protected what needed to be protected at times when protection was necessary. But when Scorpio turns that gaze inward, with the same intensity, the same relentlessness, the same refusal to accept superficial answers, what happens is not vulnerability, it is pure power. Scorpio, building itself from the inside out, is a force of nature, not because it's perfect, but because when it decides to go somewhere, it goes all the way. It doesn't stay on the shore, it dives in. This is the plan that was being hatched against you, not by an enemy, by yourself, by the deepest part of you that already knows where it needs to go and has been moving the pieces to make it happen, even if your conscious mind was still looking for the threat in the wrong place. The signals you picked up were real, the movement you felt was real, but it wasn't an attack, it was a calling, a call to stop waiting for betrayal and start building transformation. Because Scorpio wasn't made to survive indefinitely in a position of guard. It was made to let go of versions of itself that no longer fit within what it is becoming, even if those versions were built with great cost, much pain, and a lot of history. And what prevents this descent is not a lack of courage, it's the illusion that controlling information is the same as controlling life. It is not. Here is the truth that Scorpio needs to hear. Not as punishment, but as a liberation of the kind that only works when it's said bluntly. You won't be betrayed in the way you were expecting. The betrayal that's coming doesn't have the face you were watching for. It doesn't come from the outside. It comes from the version of yourself that you already know, in a very deep and very quiet part that needs to be abandoned. That needs to be left behind. That needs to be traversed and then buried so that something different can be born. Scorpio is the only sign that not only endures this descent, but needs it to truly function. Not as inevitable suffering, but as a process of renewal that lies at the core of its most essential nature. The Scorpion in astrological symbolism is not afraid of death because it has already experienced it, because it has learned through real experiences, not theory, that on the other side of destruction there is no void waiting to swallow it. There is space. Space for what will still be built, felt, discovered about oneself. And what will be built now is closer to its essence than any version of it that was erected in a defensive position. The plan that involved you was this. It was always this. It wasn't a threat from the outside, waiting for the right moment to strike. It was a call from within, waiting for the moment you were ready to listen. Someone was planning something serious involving you, and that someone is your deepest self, the part that no longer accepts the surface, the part that can't stand existing on the fringes of your own life, waiting for a safe enough moment to truly enter. There's no such thing as insurance that's good enough for Scorpio to actually go down. You already know that. There's only the moment when they decide that the cost of not going down is greater than any risk the descent might bring. And this moment, based on what you're feeling right now, what brought you to this video, could be exactly that. For those on this threshold, the divine path that guides your zodiac sign to a life of purpose is a compass. Not a map with a defined route. Scorpio doesn't follow pre-made maps, but a tool that points the direction of your deepest nature, that connects your patterns to your purpose, that transforms the intensity that sometimes seems like a burden into exactly the instrument you will need to navigate what comes next. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. Scorpio carries within its heart one of the most complex and beautiful natures of the zodiac, not because it suffers more than others, but because it feels with a depth that most people go through their entire lives without experiencing. And this depth is not a problem to be solved. It's not a wound to be healed. It's a capacity, one of the rarest, one of the most necessary. The plan that involved you was a plan of descent, of real transformation, of letting go of what no longer serves you in order to find what is genuinely yours. of ceasing to use your heightened perception as protection for everyone else and starting to use it to get closer to yourself. There's no need to be afraid of what you felt throughout this video. There's no need to be afraid of what you'll feel when you stop resisting the descent. Scorpio doesn't disappear when it transforms. It becomes another version of itself, more whole, freer, more capable of using everything built in the shadows as a foundation, not as a prison. The signal you picked up was real. The movement was real. But it was never what you thought. It was the most important call you could receive from yourself, and now you know. Because this is the secret someone was planning to reveal to you, and it was you all along. This is the kind of plan that can't be forgotten.